I don't know a lot about the Decred.
Kidding about printing.
Flooding the system with money.
Yes, exactly.
And there's no end to your ability to do that.
We will do whatever we need to do to make sure that there's enough cash in the bank.
I wish I was more educated on Decred. Decred. He is bullish on Decred.
Lots of projects have experimented with building treasuries. The first and probably the most famous one was the Ethereum DAO, which unfortunately got hacked and kind of got squashed the project. Since then, people or projects have been quite tentative about the way that they've developed these treasuries, and for the most part, they're quite centralized entities where they collect the funds and then distribute them as and when the time is necessary. Where Decred is ever so slightly different is they are working towards making it decentralized, and they have done it in stepping stones. Now, the reason you don't want to leave a treasury as a centralized entity is because it leaves it open for manipulation in so many different ways. And what you really want to do is build some strict rules around how those funds get spent to make sure that mechanisms are in place that the spending happens in a very logical way. Now, the reason a lot of projects have gone down this treasury route is really, really simple. It's to have the ability of being self-sovereign so that you don't have to rely on outside influences for your project to move forward. You're not relying on funding from external influences, which means that these external influences can't drive the project to fulfill their own self-gains, which is so often the case. If you look at the top 100 and you really dig deep into how they're funded and what's pushing the project forward, you're normally going to find some external funder there that's just pumping the project like crazy. Whenever you're looking into this stuff, just be very aware of that. And I would always say, find out what the project's all about. And as you know from previous videos, that 21 million is so important to me, and making sure there's an open ledger so that you can check the data, check what's actually happening, and then do your research. Who's driving this project forward and why are they driving it forward? With Decred, the project does not rely on external funding, which is great. Everything that's been built, and the project's about four years old, or just over 4 years, and everything that's been built has either been built with treasury funds or it's been built with the funds of the founders. So how does this work? Currently, there are 11,663,000 Decred in circulation. Remember, Decred will only ever have 21 million. It's the same as Bitcoin. It has that maximum cap. Now, for my money, and I've said this so many times before, if you are looking into this space for the first time, try and find projects that have that 21 million cap. It does help. It does help kind of avoid any of these suspicious kind of scams and things like that, and suspicious projects that are just literally trying to take your money so that they can dump their coins. So the first thing I look at is 21 million coins. Decred has that. It's great. It also has the open ledger. Probably one of the best open ledgers you've got. The Explorer is so detailed. So the next thing then is the current block reward is 11 Decred, and blocks are generated in every 5 minutes. In terms of block size, the Bitcoin block size is 1 meg, and Decred's block size every 5 minutes is 0.39 megabytes. So it works out at roughly 0.8 megabytes every 10 minutes. In terms of the block reward getting split, it gets split into 3 ways. The first way is the treasury, which gets 10%. Now, a lot of projects experiment with more going towards the treasury, and actually, in actual fact, I really like the way that Decred has said, no, we're only going to take 10% of each block. And this basically says, we will only fund this to a certain degree. We're not going to overstretch what we're meant to be doing. So 10%, I believe, is a great number. The next people that get a split of the block reward is the ticket holders. Now, for those that don't know, unlike Bitcoin, we have this hybrid proof of stake, proof of work, whereas Bitcoin only has a proof of work. And the hybrid system basically says, right, the miners do their job, but the ticket holders check the miners. So both of these people check each other, basically. So the ticket holders are people that hold the coin. Now, unlike Bitcoin, where the coin holders have no say at all, unless you're a miner with coins, of course, in this particular system, the coin holders have a say and they can check the miner's work by holding tickets. So the ticket holders get 30% of each reward for kind of checking the blocks and making sure that they fit to the rules. And then finally, the miners get 60%. You could argue that the miner's reward is slightly higher than everyone else's and that's unfair, but in actual fact, the miners have to buy the hardware and the hardware is expensive, whereas the ticket holders only have to buy the coins. And that's, yes, it can be expensive, but in actual fact, it's not as expensive as running the mining hardware. So the way the block is split up is actually quite fair and it's actually quite logical, and I quite like that. In terms of the treasury, out of the full 21 million, it will only have 2,100,000. So it's already had over 1 million, so it's only got about another 1 million to go into it over the next, probably most of that million will go into it over the next 5 years. So as we move forward, we do have to think about protecting the treasury and making sure it doesn't get depleted, and that's kind of going to be the next train of thought here. But in terms of funding, what you can do with the treasury funds is obviously you develop improvements and you develop the protocol so it's resistant against a long-lasting future. You can develop research and analytics, which is absolutely fantastic, and you can actually find out what's working, what's not, or if there's any issues coming up. It's a really important part of it. If you want to, you can fund public relations and promotions. This is a bit of a contentious issue. A lot of the stakeholders actually vote a lot of these projects down. We've had a couple of public relations people now, and one of them wasn't particularly great, but they serve a purpose, and it's not until you do these things that you understand what works and what doesn't. You can also fund the development of the projects and resources, so educational resources and things like that. And the list goes on. Probably one of the most important areas that you can fund is making sure you are future-proof. So future-proof basically means if something comes up, say for instance the algorithm for mining no longer works, having funds in place so that you can quickly fund a change in that protocol to keep the mechanism secure is really important. Now, if you look at Bitcoin, it has no mechanism for that, and you could argue that the miners probably wouldn't vote in favor of those particular mechanisms because obviously it would do them out of a job. So you're always working against what the miners want to do. Whereas with this, if you see something is broken because you funded the analytics and you think, right, we have to move forward in a new direction, Decred is more capable of doing that as long as the funds remain in place. And I think this is a really important part. So my biggest fear is the treasury gets depleted. And what you've got to remember is this isn't about now. This is about 30 years' time. When the treasury is no longer bringing in the kind of money that it's bringing in now, you want to make sure there are funds there. So think past your nose. Think 30 years ahead. And this is going to be important because if you don't, and the funds are depleted where you can't bring any new developers on board or you can't fund these proposals, the money has to come from somewhere else, and that's where it gets a bit diluted. There are suggestions that once the mining reward gets too low that they'll probably include the fee rate. So rather than currently where all the fees go to the miners, the transaction fees go to the miners, they'll be split in a similar way to what the reward is split. So you have the fees will pay 10% to the treasury, 30% to the ticket holders and 60% to the miners. So that kind of makes a logical step and that will keep it funded. But what you don't want to happen is for the fees to go too high. If the fees go too high, then people will stop using the chain. We need to keep these fees as low as possible. And I'm in no way advocating that fees should be zero because that causes a few other issues with attacks where people can just do infinite attacks and things like that. So there obviously does have to be a fee, but it needs to be a fraction of a penny at all times as far as I'm concerned. Now, one of the things that I've proposed in the past, and I've wrote a little paper on this and I'll link it below this video, is that the Treasury has a base rate. Now, a few months ago, the actual price of a Decred went down to about £7. And at that point, it was no longer cost efficient. If you're paying out your contractors, they're actually just doubling the amount of decred that they're getting. So it's depleting the treasury twice as fast. And if that was to carry on for long periods of time, that would really crucify the project. Now, I remember an interview with Jake a few years ago where he said basically if decred stays above $18, it will be fundable. It will be self-funding for a minimum of the next 20 years or foreseeable future. So that's really the target here, is if you could make it stay above that $18 and it could stay funding for the next 20 years plus, and you could keep those funds in the treasury so they don't get depleted, we can keep this funding going. And as decred becomes more valuable, obviously we'll spend less coin. So one of the proposals that I made is having a treasury base rate. And the algorithm looks something like this, where you look at the price 90-day average. I think that's how it's calculated currently. It might be a 30-day average. And you say, right, if the 90-day average is $18, for instance, or it's $16, and you've got a treasury base rate of $20, you run that algorithm and say, right, if the 90-day average is less than the base rate, pay out the base rate. If it's not, pay out the 90-day average. And that basically means that it will never, the amount that you spend in the treasury will never go below the sustainable rate, which is a really interesting thought. Now, the people that would dislike this the most are probably the contractors, because all of a sudden it's like, well, I can't, if say for instance decred is worth £7 and you've set your base rate at £20, then they're literally halving their wages. So there is that argument there. But looking at Richard Redd's research document, where he says basically the contractors are staking pretty much all of their rewards, you kind of think to yourself, well, actual fact, come on guys, this could work, because you're still earning more money by staking. So if you've just earned 1,000 decred, you basically just got yourself 9 tickets, which then earns you over the course of 140 days, can then earn you another 10 decred, and the cycle goes on. So in actual fact, although the contractors wouldn't like that, and unfortunately it's the contractors in this particular instance that could block a proposal like this, you can't help but think that this would be in the best interest of making sure that in 30 years' time we have enough funds that we can hire the best minds. We can hire the greatest developers and keep developers coming to our platform. So, I haven't proposed this. It's just shower thoughts, if you like. But I do believe that it's important that we do not deplete the treasury. So, final thought then, and we should all look at this, and once again, this is about looking further than your nose. It's about looking into the future. What does this project look like in 30 years? And whenever you're evaluating any project, you should always say the same. What does this project look like in 30 years? And run those thoughts. In 30 years, we would have already had the whole 2,100,000, so basically we've got another million there, so 1,600,000 could be the treasury size. What does this project look like if the treasury is, only got 100,000 coins left in it? What does this project look like in 30 years if the treasury has 1 million coins left in it? And I think you can see that we're going to be sat on a fantastic project if in 30 years' time there is, say, 500,000 coins in there, like there is currently. In 30 years' time, if there's, 1,000 coins in there, the future of this project diminishes slightly. So we have to, we think about those, and if we want this long-term sustainability, that's what we have to aim for. We have to aim for making sure that we don't deplete those funds. So that's pretty much it for me. If you like the content, you want to see more, if you have any thoughts about what I've said, if you think it's complete rubbish, it'd be nice to hear your comments below. If you want to subscribe, if you want to like the content, fantastic stuff, and I'll see you next time.
I don't know a lot about the decred.
Kidding about flooding the system with money.
Yes, exactly.
And there's no end to your ability to do that.
We will do whatever we need to do to make sure that there's enough cash in the bank.
I wish I was more educated on decred. Decred is bullish on decred.